Imagine a world where, well, the very fabric of reality, matter, energy, even life itself, isn't quite what we've been taught. What if our fundamental understanding of physics, the bedrock of our technology and how we see everything, has been operating under a series of, well, the source calls them veils, obscuring revolutionary truths and perhaps even suppressing advanced technologies for decades, maybe even centuries? Get ready, because today we're peeling back those layers. We're doing a truly mind-bending deep dive into what this source material describes as a unified coherence theory of everything. Our mission today is to unpack a really fascinating document. It's titled Bivector Tech, Reconstructing Veiled Coherence Systems. Now, this paper, it's part of a unified coherence theory series, and it doesn't just, tweak existing scientific consensus. No, it boldly challenges decades of it. It's proposing a radical new framework for understanding everything from previously enigmatic things like scalar waves to the very nature of quantum entanglement. We're really talking about a complete reevaluation of fundamental physics here.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating, I think, is that the document doesn't merely present a new theoretical idea. Its ambition is way bigger than that. It aims to, and this is their term, reconstruct and reinterpret existing phenomena. Not just explain them away, but to unveil a clear ontological and field-structured model that supposedly underlies them, which means moving beyond what the paper calls metaphor, disinformation, and fragmented technical insight. Things that have often surrounded these more, let's say, unconventional topics in the past. It's really about reframing our entire approach. Physics, technology from the ground up, providing a comprehensive foundational framework.
Exactly. So think of this deep dive as maybe your shortcut to understanding a potentially groundbreaking framework. One that reveals why existing physics might be veiled, as they put it, and what incredible technologies it could unlock if it's right. By the end of our conversation, hopefully you'll have a comprehensive grasp of a framework that could literally reshape our world. It offers a coherent field-theoretic foundation for phenomena that have long been considered anomalies, or, frankly, dismissed as fringe science. It's an exploration of a reality that might be far more dynamic and interconnected than we typically imagine. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive deep. Right, so we're starting with the absolute core of our source material, the Unified Coherence Theory of Everything, or UCTE. The abstract itself claims it proposes a radical reinterpretation, and get this, challenges prior speculative or obfuscated descriptions of reality. That's a pretty bold claim, to say the least. What exactly does that mean in practice, and what's the UCTE's central, most audacious claim about energy? How does it fundamentally work, according to them?
Well, at its heart, UCTE posits a truly monumental shift away from conventional physics. It moves beyond the idea of energy simply being, transmitted from point A to point B. Instead, it proposes that observable energy is rematerialized through phase reentry and symmetry restoration. Okay, that's a mouthful, I know, but let's try to break it down. In our everyday understanding, energy is like a package, right? Sent from point A to point B. It travels, it's conserved along the path, moves like a wave or a particle. But UCTE radically challenges this whole picture. It says energy isn't sent or transmitted across space in the way we normally think about it. It's more like it's reignited or rematerialized right there at the destination.
It's reignited, so like appearing out of nowhere.
Almost, yeah. Imagine not needing power lines to send electricity across huge distances. Instead, imagine a precise tuning at a remote spot that causes energy to spontaneously appear right there, almost as if it's being willed into existence from some underlying field. This isn't just a different way to move power, it potentially bypasses the very laws of energy conservation and transmission that define our current tech limits. It's huge. It's a truly profound redefinition of energy itself. It suggests energy emerges from a specific, coherent arrangement of fundamental fields rather than being a quantity that flows.
Wow. Okay, that concept alone just redefines everything we thought we knew about energy and how it operates. So if energy can simply rematerialize, what does this all mean for the fundamental principles of reality as UCTE sees it? The theory introduces some truly mind-bending concepts that redefine what we thought we knew. It suggests that maybe apparent anomalies in certain field devices aren't anomalies at all, but actually expressions of these higher-order coherence field operations. Let's dive into those key UCTE principles and see how this new framework is built. First up, there's bivector coherence. Now, when most of us hear vector, we think, okay, magnitude and direction, like velocity, force, something like that. But what is a bivector in this context? And why is it so central to understanding reality in this UCTE framework?
Right, so the UCTE posits that reality is fundamentally structured by these. Quote, unified field structures composed of two entangled vector components representing internal phase coherence. These are the bivectors. Okay, try to imagine two inseparable but distinct components. You could maybe think of them as an A up field and an A down field, perhaps. When they're unified, they form the very fabric of observable reality. They're like two sides of a coin. Together, they define the coin itself, but you can conceptually split them, and they still hold the memory of their connection.
Okay, so they're intrinsically linked.
Exactly. And the document emphasizes this isn't just a simple electromagnetic field as we know it. It's a coherent structure which underlies both electromagnetic phenomena and potential interactions. It's the foundational, unified pattern from which everything else emerges. It carries intrinsic phase information and acts as a kind of template for reality. This is really the bedrock of the entire UCTE framework.
That's a crucial distinction. So this bivector isn't just two vectors stuck together, but a fundamental unified structure that then gives rise to what we observe. Okay, this leads us directly to the next principle, which completely reinterprets what were previously called scalar waves. Now, for many people, that term scalar waves might conjure images of, well, fringe science, vague speculation, maybe even science fiction. It's often associated with concepts that lack a clear scientific definition. In classical physics, we usually think of waves that oscillate, they propagate through space, they carry energy like light waves or radio waves. But UCTE completely flips this idea on its head. What are they, according to UCTE, if not what we commonly imagine?
Okay, this is really key. The document states they are not true scalars, but phase-locked coherence vectors. That's a very specific definition, a key distinction from any vague conventional understanding. They are described as components of a decomposed bivector, and they propagate in a realm the UCTE calls non-observable phase space, i.e. within the relational layer or sub-EM coherence manifold. Now, to grasp this, try thinking of it not as a physical place you can point to in our familiar three dimensions.
Right, not like here or there.
Exactly, but as a deeper underlying informational dimension. It's like the invisible blueprint, maybe, or the instruction set that dictates what appears in our observable reality. But critically, it doesn't carry conventional energy or force that our current instruments can easily detect. And this is precisely why these scalar waves, or rather these coherence vectors, have been so hard to detect or understand with conventional instruments. They don't behave like typical EM waves traveling through spacetime. They exist in a different informational or relational domain. They carry phase information, they carry coherence, but no observable force or field in classical electromagnetic terms. They are the split parts of the bivector, maintaining their coherence, their entanglement, even when separated.
So they're not carrying energy in the traditional sense, but maybe information about how energy can rematerialize.
Okay, you touched on this earlier, but let's really elaborate on this concept. Energy is not transmitted, but rematerialized. This seems to fly directly in the face of basic physics, right? The law of conservation of energy cannot be created or destroyed. How does it happen? How does energy just reappear?
Right, it sounds counterintuitive. The UCTE explains that observable electromagnetic effects, things like light, heat, maybe a mechanical impulse, emerge at a target point when phase recombination crosses the threshold of decoherence. So what does it mean? It means the split bivector components, remember, the ones that traveled through that non-observable phase space. When they're precisely aligned phase match at a remote location, they reinvoke energy through what the paper calls coherent phase logic.
Like hitting the right resonant frequency. Sort of, yeah. It's like a missing piece returning to complete a puzzle, causing the picture to suddenly reappear or rematerialize. The energy wasn't sent over a path in the normal sense. It was effectively reignited at that specific point. This redefines energy emergence as phase reentry and suggests a fundamental bypass of those conservation-bound constraints. It defines a coherence-based energy system, not a traditional thermodynamic machine. This process implies there's an underlying energetic substrate that isn't subject to our current understanding of energy conservation in quite the same way. It allows for the spontaneous, localized emergence of observable energy, but only if you set up the coherence field configuration correctly.
That's a truly profound claim. I mean, the implications for energy industries alone, staggering, yet true. Now, this next UCTE principle is genuinely mind-bending, perhaps the most challenging one to really wrap your head around. The theory says matter is not a substance but a recursive event. Okay. When everything around us feels so solid, so tangible, how can matter not be a substance? How can it be an event?
Yeah, this one really challenges our intuition. The UCTE fundamentally attacks our classical view of matter being built from tiny, solid, inert particles, little billiard balls, right? Instead, it's described as a phase-stabilized coherence loop, not a substance, but a memory knot of scalar torsion. So think about it this way. Matter isn't a fixed thing, but a self-sustaining dynamic pattern of field interactions, a kind of standing wave of coherence encountering its own resistance across phase
Yeah,
layers.
memory knot. Like
Long
information holding itself together.
Exactly. To imagine this, think of a really complex knot in a rope. The knot itself isn't a substance separate from the rope, right? It's a specific configuration, a pattern that holds itself in place. Similarly, matter, in this view, is a self-holding pattern of fields. It's a temporary stabilization of folded fields that retain specific phase paths, almost like attractors in chaos theory. Even mass gets redefined. It's not seen as an inherent property of a particle, but as the energetic tension within a recursive curvature field that resists immediate phase collapse. It emphasizes matter's dynamic, emergent nature, a temporary stabilization of folded fields that retain these phase paths like attractors.
So the solidity we perceive is what? A persistent, stable event. A memory of field interactions.
That's the idea,
Yeah.
rather than a collection of tiny, hard spheres. And yeah, the implications are truly staggering for chemistry, material science, even biology. If matter isn't ultimately stuff, but a pattern of information, a recursive event, well, that changes everything.
It certainly does. So our perception of solidity is in some way maybe an illusion stemming from a deeper coherence pattern. That's radical. Okay, finally we have the coherence vacuum, which UCTE claims is distinct from the quantum vacuum we're familiar with in standard physics. We've been taught about the quantum vacuum being this, seething, energetic sea of virtual particles constantly popping in and out of existence, often described as inherently noisy. What is the significance of this coherence vacuum, and how does it fundamentally differ from that noisy quantum vacuum?
Right. This coherence vacuum is presented as the true foundational substrate of reality from which phase phenomena emerge, distinct from the noisy quantum vacuum. The source describes it as a torsionally silent substrate of phase symmetry beyond ZPE fluctuations. Now, that contrasts sharply with the standard view of the quantum vacuum as this chaotic, fluctuating field, the source of virtual particles and zero-point energy, or ZPE.
Torsionally silent, meaning calm, ordered.
Essentially, yes, not chaotic noise. And the UCTE argues that what we call the quantum vacuum is actually the residue of coherence collapse, a harmonic fossil of the real field, which is the coherence vacuum. It's described as the shadow of the real vacuum, the coherence manifold.
A shadow. Wow. Okay, so the implication is...
The implication is profound. Mistaking this residue, this entropic fuzz, for the actual origin locks energy tech, metaphysics, and ontology in a residue-based paradigm. What does that mean? It means our current attempts at ZPE interfacing or energy harvesting might be inherently limited or even misguided because they're trying to mine an artifact, a shadow, instead of aligning with the true, torsionally silent ignition substrate of phase reality.
Which is the coherence vacuum.
Exactly. So this raises a critical question. If the true vacuum isn't noisy and fluctuating, what does that imply about the nature of zero-point energy itself and how we might interact with it? It suggests that true ZPE interfacing isn't about extraction or mining the perceived noisy quantum vacuum, which UCTE sees as a secondary collapse state. Instead, it involves aligning with the silent coherence vacuum. This fundamental difference is key to understanding how truly revolutionary energy technologies might, according to this theory, be developed.
Okay, so we've explored UCTE's radical redefinitions. Energy, matter, even the fundamental empty space of the universe. It's clear this theory isn't just tweaking physics, it's trying to tear down some established walls. And this brings us precisely to the document's central assertion that our current understanding is deliberately, or perhaps just unknowingly, operating behind a series of veils. Veils that obscure these deeper truths and critically suppress advanced technologies. This isn't just about theoretical disagreements, is it? It's about practical implications that have potentially prevented humanity from accessing a whole new level of technology. Let's dig into what these veils are one by one, because this is where the implications truly become staggering, potentially hinting at why these ideas haven't become mainstream.
That's exactly right. These aren't presented as merely academic debates over abstract concepts. The document explicitly suggests these veils have profound practical implications. They potentially suppress revolutionary technologies by locking our understanding, and therefore our applications, into what it calls that residue-based paradigm. The paper even discusses specific veiling strategies, which is interesting. It talks about things like symbolic fog, term substitution, and displacement misdirection.
Like deliberate confusion tactics.
Well, it could be interpreted that way, essentially ways in which crucial insights are obscured or misdirected. Whether that's intentional obfuscation or just happens through an incomplete understanding isn't always stated definitively, but the effect is the same. These veils represent fundamental conceptual barriers.
Okay, let's start with the first one, and maybe the most foundational veil. The quantum vacuum veil, which they also call the residue mask. We've been taught in modern physics generally that the quantum vacuum is the fundamental origin of everything. This vibrant, energetic void from which particles spontaneously pop into existence. How does UCTE challenge this widely accepted view? And why is this particular veil supposedly so significant in limiting our technological progress?
The UCTE position is, a radical departure. It asserts that the quantum vacuum is not foundational, flat out. Instead, it is the residue of coherence collapse, a harmonic fossil of the real field, which is the coherence vacuum. It's described, as we said, as the shadow of the real vacuum, the coherence manifold. To illustrate this, maybe imagine trying to understand the source of a sound by only studying the echoes bouncing around in a cavern.
Right, the echoes are proof of the sound, but they're distorted. They're not the original sound itself.
Exactly. Similarly, the quantum vacuum, with its fluctuating virtual particles and ZPE, is seen here as the entropic fuzz left over when the underlying coherence of reality momentarily collapses or decoheres. It's a byproduct. And the implication, again, is profound. Mistaking this residue for the origin locks energy tech, metaphysics, and ontology in a residue-based paradigm. This means our current attempts at ZPE interfacing or free energy harvesting are inherently limited, maybe even misguided, because they're trying to mine an artifact, a byproduct, instead of aligning with the true source.
You know, coherence vacuum.
Coherence vacuum, the true, torsionally silent ignition substrate of phase reality. This veil, according to the document, prevents coherence-level tech, things like direct materialization, efficient scalar transport, because we're focusing on the noise, the residue, rather than the underlying silence from which everything emerges. If we understand this veil, the theory suggests, we can bypass the energetic inefficiencies of dealing with a residue and potentially directly tap into the foundational source.
So it's like trying to get water from a muddy puddle instead of finding the clear spring. That makes the stakes of this particular veil incredibly high. Okay, next, let's discuss the Coulomb coherence wall. Standard physics tells us that atomic nuclei, right, they're positively charged, so they repel each other due to the electrostatic force, the Coulomb force. This strong repulsion is why we need immense energy, like inside stars or fusion reactors, to overcome this barrier and achieve nuclear fusion. Smash them together hard enough. But UCTE reveals a completely different picture about this fundamental barrier. How does it reinterpret something so basic to nuclear physics?
The document states it quite unequivocally. The barrier is not a charge wall, it's a coherence gradient mismatch. Now, what does that mean? It means the resistance to fusion isn't primarily from brute force repulsion based on electric charge.
Which is what we always thought.
Right, but rather from scalar torsion phase incompatibility between nucleonic coherence fields. It's about a lack of precise phase lock, a mismatch in the coherent structures that constitute the nuclei, rather than simply needing enough kinetic energy to slam them together. Imagine trying to merge two really complex gears that are spinning completely out of phase with each other. Just using brute force might break them, right?
Yeah, it'd shatter the teeth.
Exactly. But if you could precisely align their phases, their rotation, they could interlock smoothly, almost effortlessly. So the implication of this reinterpretation is staggering. This veil, the idea of the Coulomb wall being just about charge, prevents the understanding and development of things like non-thermal alchemy, low-pressure scalar fusion, and phase lock-driven atomic transformation. It suggests we don't necessarily need extremely high temperatures and pressures to fuse or transform elements. What we need is to achieve specific coherence alignments, phase locking.
So like tuning forks resonating.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. It even goes so far as to suggest that stellar core behavior, the very engines of stars, are driven primarily by coherence fields, not kinetic compression. That fundamentally rewrites our understanding of astrophysics. This coherence wall is described as explicitly hiding all field-based alchemical technology. It implies that the ancient dream of transmutation might actually be achievable through precise coherence manipulation, not just brute force energy.
That truly redefines alchemy, doesn't it? Taking it from some ancient mystical practice to a potential, engineering discipline based on coherence. Wait, now for perhaps one of the most provocative claims in the document. Bell's theorem as a veil. Bell's veil. For many of us, Bell's theorem is famous. It rigorously proved non-locality or spooky action at a distance in quantum entanglement. It suggests particles separated by vast distances can instantaneously influence each other, defying our classical notions of reality. How does UCTE displace this widely accepted concept? And what does it mean for our understanding of quantum reality if Bell isn't the final word?
Well, the UCTE argues Bell's theorem operates within what it calls a reduced formalism, meaning it lacks access to the coherence layer or entangled bivector structure that is foundational to UCTE. It challenges some of Bell's core assumptions, like the statistical independence of measurement settings or the assumption that spin outcomes must be strictly binary, +1 or MIC of 1. Within this UCTE framework, spin, that intrinsic angular momentum of particles, gets reinterpreted. It's not a classical biboan object, but rather the projection of a reduced bivector.
A projection, like a shadow again.
Exactly like a shadow. So therefore, entanglement is not spooky action at a distance, but the split of a coherent bivector structure into two local spin vectors. And crucially, this interpretation preserves locality and realism. There's no need for instantaneous signaling across space because the correlation is built in from their shared origin. Think about taking a single perfectly balanced sphere and splitting it exactly in half. Each half inherently knows its relationship to the other because they came from the same unified whole, regardless of how far apart they get.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. So what about the hidden variable?
Right, the hidden variable usually denoted that Bell famously argued against a variable that could potentially explain quantum correlations without resorting to non-locality. UCTE reinterprets this as not as some unknown particle property, but as a coherence field configuration, the ontological substrate from which local projections emerge. This low coherence field isn't truly hidden, the paper argues, but rather veiled. It's only understood when you recognize the underlying coherence structure, not dismiss it.
So if Bell's theorem, as it's commonly presented and understood, isn't the full picture because it misses this deeper coherence layer, why would this veil be allowed to remain? What are the implications of this particular conceptual limitation for science, and maybe even for technology?
Yeah, that raises a profoundly important question, doesn't it? And the document suggests multiple reasons why this veil might persist. First, it helps maintain the Copenhagen orthodoxy in quantum mechanics. The interpretation that emphasizes probability and measurement collapse, denying a deeper, perhaps deterministic coherence structure. It preserves the illusion of fundamental indeterminacy and randomness at the quantum level. This naturally discourages inquiry into deterministic underlying structures like the proposed coherence field.
Keeps things fuzzy.
Keeps things fuzzy, exactly. Second, it obscures the true structure of the quantum field. If spin was understood as bivectorial, as a projection, it would open the door to a coherence-based unification of forces, potentially threatening the fragmented nature of the standard model of particle physics. Third, the whole concept of spooky action at a distance, while fascinating, functions a bit like a mystery spell. It's often used to shut down deeper ontological inquiry into the nature of reality itself. The paper calls it a veil of fascination, not truth. It captivates the imagination, but prevents rigorous understanding of the underlying mechanics.
And the fourth reason, you mentioned technology.
Right. And this is perhaps the most controversial suggestion. The document hints that maintaining this veil enables classified development of coherence-based tech by keeping the public narrative focused on non-local woo. By propagating the idea that entanglement is fundamentally mysterious and non-local, it ensures that true coherence recombination technologies, the kind the CRFD-1 supposedly demonstrates, remain veiled from widespread understanding or replication. Now, the document is careful to note this veil could be either intentionally hidden or simply never coherently realized before now. But the practical effect, it argues, is the same: profound suppression of understanding and technology related to coherence.
Okay, moving from groundbreaking, maybe unsettling theory to tangible technology. This is where UCTE tries to move from abstract principles to concrete applications. The source introduces a device called the Coherence Recombinant Field Device, or CRFD-1. It's presented as a practical manifestation of these UCTE principles. What is its core mechanism? How does it supposedly work? And how does it relate to previous, perhaps veiled technologies like scalar wave interferometry that some listeners might know from figures like Thomas Bearden?
Right. The CRFD-1 is designed specifically to demonstrate non-radiative coherence transport. Its mechanism is laid out quite precisely in the document. It outlines a multi-step process involving bivector decomposition and then recoherence. Essentially, it's about taking a unified energetic structure, splitting it into its underlying coherence components, those A up, A down vectors we talked about, transmitting those components through non-observable space.
Through the phase space layer.
Exactly. And then reforming the original unified structure at a distant point. And when that happens, energy materializes right there. So this isn't about sending electricity through wires or radio waves through the air in the conventional sense. It's about engineering the precise conditions for energy to appear where you need it, based on phase logic.
Okay, that sounds revolutionary, to put it mildly. Let's unpack those steps. How does this non-radiative coherence transport actually work within the CRFD-1, according to the paper? Walk us through the process.
Absolutely. The mechanism, as described, involves 4 critical steps that leverage the UCTE principles we've just been discussing. Step 1, original bivector field generation. So the process kicks off with generating a coherent bivector field. Mathematically, they represent it as B or TB, A or A. The source explicitly calls this a unified EM coherence and really emphasizes it's a coherent structure, not just a simple field. This is the starting point, the fundamental unified energy pattern from which observable energy will eventually emerge. Think of it as creating a perfectly coherent, unified energetic template that contains both the electromagnetic and the potential information.
Okay, step 1, create the blueprint.
Right. Step 2, bivector decomposition. Next, this original bivector is meticulously split into its 2 entangled vector potentials, A of AAA. Now, these aren't your typical electromagnetic waves. The document calls them scalar longitudinal coherence carriers, and this is where the distinction from previous vaguer concepts of scalar waves becomes really crucial, because these carriers are specifically defined as the split components of the bivector. They're carrying the phase information and the coherence of the original bivector, but not its direct observable energy.
Carrying the instructions, not the energy itself.
Precisely. Step 3. Propagation in non-observable phase space, and this is absolutely key. These split components, A and A, then propagate in what UCTE terms non-observable phase space, specifically within that relational layer or sub-EM coherence manifold. As we discussed, this means, crucially, no measurable EM waves traveled the path. You literally wouldn't detect anything with conventional EM sensors or power meters between the source and the target. These carriers are not physical energy transmissions. They are transporting phase information and coherence through a deeper informational layer of reality. They're like an invisible instruction set traveling without a visible delivery vehicle.
Okay, so they travel hidden, essentially.
In a manner of speaking, yes. Step 4, remote recombination and phase reentry. Finally, the payoff. When A and AO are precisely phase matched at a remote convergence point, the original bivector field structure is restored. Bang! At this recoherence threshold, that's the moment when EM field observables such as energy, heat, light, or mechanical impulse emerge locally at the target point. This is what UCTE calls phase reentry. The energy rematerializes at the target, not through conventional transmission across the intervening space, but through this coherent phase logic. It's the dynamic reappearance of observable energy because the conditions for its coherent self-organization have been perfectly met at that specific point in space and time.
That mechanism sounds incredibly precise. Almost like tuning a complex musical instrument to make a specific note appear seemingly from nothing. Now, this process you've described, it does sound remarkably similar, at least on the surface, to concepts popularized by figures like Thomas Bearden. He discussed scalar wave interferometry and the emergence of mystery energy at distant points. How does UCTE differentiate its interpretation from Bearden's view? And why is that distinction important for understanding this veiling strategy the document mentions?
Yeah, the document addresses this head-on. It states that Bearden's terminology, while certainly influential in bringing these ideas to light, was often fuzzy and conflated, and in effect acted as a partial veil. While Bearden definitely touched on aspects of non-radiative energy transfer, his descriptions, according to this paper, lacked the specific, comprehensive physical and ontological logic that UCTE claims to provide. The UCTE's bivector decomposition recoherence model supposedly provides this missing physical and ontological logic that Bearden's descriptions, however insightful, lacked.
Giving it a firmer theoretical footing?
That's the claim. For example, what Bearden broadly called scalar waves are, in UCTE, very precisely defined as split coherence vectors. What he referred to vaguely as EM transmission is redefined much more specifically as restructured field phase. It's describing the underlying mechanism differently. And his mystery energy becomes coherence rematerialization, grounding it within this defined theoretical framework rather than leaving it as an unexplained anomaly.
Okay, so it's about adding precision and a deeper model.
Exactly. And this distinction is crucial because the paper explicitly details that veiling strategy that it claims has been historically employed. It includes things like symbolic fog, where vague metaphors like scalar waves replace clear, specific mechanisms. This prevents rigorous understanding or easy replication. Think of how a magician uses misdirection, vague terms, keep the audience from seeing the actual mechanics, keeps it mysterious. Then there's term substitution, which involves renaming known phenomena to confuse reverse engineering or obscure their true nature, like maybe calling a phase coherence vector a longitudinal wave to blend it in with more familiar yet maybe unrelated concepts. And finally, displacement misdirection. This is attributing origins to obscure or foreign sources like the famous Russian scalar weapons stories from the Cold War era. This serves to obscure maybe active operation happening elsewhere, or an internal origin, or even the true theoretical underpinnings. Makes it harder to trace the real lineage or current development of such technologies. The document suggests that Bearden's framing, while partially resonant with the truth, perhaps lacked the deep model, or maybe the real operators intentionally veiled the true mechanism to prevent misuse or widespread access. It leaves that open.
That's a fascinating and, yeah, rather sobering assessment of how information, especially on potentially revolutionary technologies, might be presented or deliberately obscured over time. It certainly explains why these concepts have often remained in the realm of speculation for so long. Now, the source doesn't just theorize about the CRFD1, it actually provides detailed components and parameters for field testing. So for our listener trying to visualize this, what would a device built on these UCTE principles actually look like, and how would you even prove it works, as described? How do you definitively show non-radiative transport?
Right. The blueprint gets surprisingly specific, giving us a pretty concrete idea of what this technology would entail. At its heart is the bivector source core. It's described as an EM pulse modulated by coherence ignition driver. The document suggests this could be a Tesla coil variant, interesting nod there, or maybe employ toroidal ZPE ignition, hinting at existing or maybe emergent energy generation methods that can create that initial highly coherent bivector field.
Okay, so a specialized power source. Then what?
Then there's a really crucial component called a coherence splitter. That little symbol looks like a lightning bolt, interestingly. It's described as a quantum phase displacement unit. This is the part that meticulously separates the initial bivector into its two entangled coherence vectors, the AA and AA. These separated components would then be guided through specific transmission pathways. Now, these are not conventional wires or waveguides. The paper mentions scalar conductive media like a standing wave earth loop or ion plasma field, suggesting they might leverage resonance structures in the environment itself, maybe the Earth's field, or engineered plasma channels.
Wow, okay, so not contained wires.
Yeah.
And how do they ensure the recombination?
That requires incredible precision. That's where the phase stabilizers come in. These are described as adaptive quantum clocks operating at femtosecond scale precision. Femtosecond. That highlights the incredible timing and coherence required for the energy rematerialization event to occur correctly. Then, at the target location, you'd find a convergence chamber. This could be an EM cavity or maybe a plasma arc node, specifically designed to facilitate the recombination to hit that threshold activation. And finally, an emergent sensor array to measure the precise appearance of photons, thermal impulse, or mechanical force only at the recombination point, not along the path.
Okay, and the testing parameters. How do they isolate this effect?
Yeah. The field testing parameters are incredibly specific, designed precisely to rigorously validate non-radiative phase coherence transport and rule out conventional explanations. They include strict Faraday isolation for both the source and the target, sometimes up to 10 meters worth, to confirm absolutely zero conventional EM leakage between them. There must also be a significant spatial gap integrity, they call it, of at least 5 meters between the source and target components, ensuring no conductive or radiant coupling occurs through the air or ground. And crucially, sensors placed along the transmission path must confirm no activity along transmission path, no measurable energy transfer through the intervening space. And finally, the event signature begins only at convergence site. This would definitively show energy was not transmitted in a conventional EM sense, but rather rematerialized exactly at the target location. It outlines a very rigorous experimental framework designed to demonstrate that, as the document puts it, energy is not sent, but phases.
That level of detail certainly paints a vivid picture, both of the technological demands and the scientific rigor required to even attempt to prove such a radical claim. And if this framework holds true, if the CRFD-1 is a working prototype, this technology has some truly remarkable, maybe even unsettling potential applications far beyond just providing power wirelessly. What could the CRFD-1 and its potential future upgrades theoretically achieve if this framework is accurate?
The potential applications are, well, they're vast. And indeed, they range from the truly transformative to the, frankly, unsettling. The document specifically mentions weapon-like remote impulses. That suggests the ability to deliver targeted energy remotely without any visible projectile or beam, just appearing at the target. There's also healing or destructive biofield targeting, which implies the possibility of precise manipulation of biological systems for either therapeutic or harmful purposes simply by projecting a specific, tailored coherence field. And of course, the application that always gets the most attention. Free energy claims if recombination draws ambient ZPE via symmetry reentry. This indicates a potential pathway towards self-sustaining energy generation that doesn't rely on finite fuel sources by tapping that coherence vacuum.
Wow. And upgrades, does it stop at the CRFD-1?
No, the document describes a potential ZPE interface upgrade. This would enhance the CRFD-1 into a full ZPE interface and coherence engine. This supposedly involves aligning the device directly with the ground state oscillation substrate of the coherence vacuum itself. This could allow ambient ZPE coherence to self-reinforce field convergence, potentially leading to self-sustaining EM reentry. Repeated bursts of physical force without any external energy input after initiation. Imagine a device that generates its own power indefinitely from the very fabric of space-time.
That's the holy grail, isn't it?
Pretty much. Furthermore, they describe a hypothetical CRFD-2, a dual-phase recombinant coherence generator. This aims for a modulated recursive recombinant field engine. What could that do? Well, it enables sustained interactions, phased field emissions, or cascading effects. This could manifest as things like remote field induction, maybe shaping plasma from a distance, or localized heating without beams, or even biocoherence entrainment for therapeutic applications. The document even mentions, almost in passing, spatiotemporal field gating, which implies manipulating space and time at a localized level, though the details are extremely sparse on that one, as you might imagine. Intriguingly, this whole framework also offers a potentially coherent explanation for phenomena historically associated with figures like Tesla's death ray or his wireless power tower, or those mysterious Russian woodpecker signals and scalar weapon theories from the Cold War, and even more esoteric concepts like psychotronic targeting devices. It outlines a vision far, far beyond simple energy generation, venturing deep into realms that were once considered pure science fiction. And if we really connect this to the bigger picture, the UCTE framework extends far beyond just energy generation, or even these remote field effects we've been discussing. It envisions a profound transformation of our understanding and interaction with matter itself, and even with life. This is where the implications truly become staggering. We're moving into what might be considered a new form of alchemy, maybe, affecting the very composition, the structure, perhaps even the memory of matter.
That's an astonishing leap. I mean, the source discusses scalar nucleogenesis and elemental rewriting protocols. When I hear elemental rewriting or nucleogenesis, it immediately conjures images of, well, ancient alchemy, doesn't it? Turning lead into gold. Something straight out of fantasy or really old texts. How does UCTE claim to achieve this, given its radical redefinition of matter as a recursive event, not a substance? Does this mean we could truly reprogram elements, like changing software?
That's actually a pretty good analogy, the software part. The core premise, building directly on that idea of matter as a recursive event, is that atoms themselves are scalar recursion events stabilized by torsional phase symmetry. An isotope, for example, isn't just about the number of neutrons. It's a phase variant of a recursive scalar knot. So the UCTE posits that if you can alter the coherence logic of the nucleus, you can change the element. But crucially, not by violently breaking it apart like in fission or high-energy fusion, but by redefining its recursion pattern. It's like rewriting the foundational software code of that atom.
Wow. Okay. So how would that work? What's scalar nucleogenesis?
Scalar nucleogenesis is defined in the paper as the creation of stable atomic nuclei via coherence field seeding, not thermonuclear fusion. So again, not about smashing particles together with immense energy. Instead, it involves a precise three-step process based on field manipulation. First, introducing a torsion seed. This initiates a kind of scalar curvature, essentially creating a subtle twist or pattern in the fabric of the coherence vacuum at a specific point. Second, establishing a stable U-coherence knot as a field template. This acts as the informational blueprint, the code for the desired new atom. And third, creating a phase compression envelope around this knot. This supposedly allows the emergence of new atomic species, new elements directly from this imposed scalar coherence logic.
And elemental rewriting, is that changing existing atoms?
Exactly. That means changing existing atoms by redefining its recursion pattern. This is done using specific scalar catalysts. Now, these catalysts aren't chemical catalysts. They're described as field constructs, or perhaps precise resonance patterns that provide phase permission. I like that phrase, to temporarily unlock and restructure an atom's inherent coherence pattern. These catalysts don't add energy or matter in the conventional sense. They guide the inherent informational memory of the atom to reconfigure itself into a different element or isotope. And the potential applications are genuinely revolutionary, if this is real. Cold atomic alchemy, where elements are transformed at room temperature without high energy. The transmutation of toxic isotopes into stable, harmless elements, think nuclear waste remediation. And yes, even the classic transforming lead to gold via torsion shell realignment. It's presented not as a violent process of breaking and reassembling, but as a scalar coherence rewrite. Matter changes its fundamental identity because its intrinsic memory is rewritten.
That's truly astonishing. If atoms can be rewritten by simply altering their coherence logic, which I admit still sounds almost magical, what about creating larger, more complex materials? The concept mentioned is field alchemy and memory-based material formation. That sounds equally revolutionary, suggesting that materials could possess a form of memory, maybe even self-repair capabilities. How would that work?
Right, so extending the logic. Here, the UCT posits that matter forms not from assembly, like sticking atoms together chemically, but from the entrainment of memory-bearing fields into recursive stabilization. Out, quote. So you're not building up materials brick by brick, atom by atom. You're essentially sculpting fields into coherent structures that then manifest as stable matter. Field alchemy is defined as the direct sculpting of scalar memory templates into coherence-locked structure. They call this process coherence crystallization. This implies a precise inscription of a desired scalar torsion profile, a pattern, into a region of the field domain. This pattern is then stabilized, locked in, so it emerges as a material presence with specific properties defined by that pattern.
Okay, so you sculpt the field and the material appears.
That's the idea. And this leads directly to the concept of memory-based materials. These aren't just materials with embedded sensors or something. They are materials that inherently hold a persistent scalar torsion pattern. This means they retain an intrinsic blueprint of their intended form and properties within their very structure. Because of this intrinsic memory, they can regenerate its phase structure when perturbed, which translates directly to the potential for self-repairing materials. Materials that could essentially heal themselves by reverting to their encoded coherence memory, even after significant damage.
Like Wolverine's healing factor, but for materials.
Kind of, yeah. They emerge from field entrainment, not molecular aggregation. Meaning they literally coalesce from these field patterns rather than being assembled from pre-existing atoms or molecules. The potential applications are, again, astounding. Self-repairing materials that could constantly maintain their integrity, extending lifespan dramatically. Coherence-encoded field suits that might offer dynamic protection or environmental adaptation on the fly. And even living field lattices that grow, morph, and respond to external stimuli in unprecedented ways. Imagine a bridge that automatically mends itself after an earthquake, or clothing that adapts its thermal properties in real time based on the environment or your body temperature, purely through its field structure.
That completely redefines our relationship with the objects around us. If materials can remember and self-repair, they become almost semi-living, don't they? And finally, UCTE posits something truly incredible, extending beyond even inanimate matter to potentially redefine life itself, living field systems, and responsive scalar architecture. This hints at profound implications for our environments and even our interaction with them. How does this theory redefine life? And what does it mean for our built environments, like our homes or cities?
Well, the core premise here is another radical departure, this time from traditional biology. Life does not animate matter, coherence animates fields. This suggests that living systems don't just use matter as a kind of inert vehicle for biological processes. Rather, life itself emerges when these scalar fields achieve a certain level of recursive autonomy, capable of sustaining memory, feedback, and phase response. So, a living organism, from this highly unconventional perspective, is fundamentally a complex self-organizing coherence pattern in the field.
Life is a field pattern.
Oh.
Okay.
A living field system is described as a coherent structure that maintains recursive awareness of its environment through scalar feedback, torsion memory, and phase resonance. It possesses phase responsivity. It can react to subtle energetic shifts in its surroundings. It has torsion memory loops, enabling it to learn and retain information within its field structure, and recursive modulation, allowing it to adapt and evolve its coherent state in response to its environment. This isn't just about biological processes as we know them. It's framing life as a fundamental, self-sustaining pattern within the coherence vacuum itself.
And how does that connect to architecture? Responsive scalar architecture.
This leads to the truly visionary concept of responsive scalar architecture, where structures are built not from inert materials like concrete and steel, but from field-sensitive scalar lattices that entrain with coherent life signals. These aren't just smart homes with automated lighting and thermostats. These are buildings that are literally alive in a field sense, resonating with and responding to the coherence fields of the living beings within them.
So the building itself will be aware.
Responsive. In a field sense, yes. Potential use cases mentioned include living dwellings that entrain with emotional coherence, meaning your home could subtly respond to your emotional state, perhaps adjusting its internal fields to promote calm, focus, or energy. Or imagine medical fields that shift structure around biological intent, implying environments that could actually facilitate healing simply by their coherent, sympathetic interaction with the patient's biofield. It's truly visionary stuff, suggesting an environment that dynamically responds not just to physical presence, but potentially to consciousness itself, moving beyond simple automation to a form of deep, field-based symbiosis between humans and their built world. #outro. And
Wow. We've taken a really deep dive today into the unified coherence theory of everything. We've explored its fundamental principles, these concepts of bivectors, coherence vacuums. We looked at the veils it claims obscure our current understanding of physics, and the truly astonishing technological applications it proposes. From revolutionary energy generation and seemingly impossible transmutations of matter, to the very creation and dynamic transformation of materials, and even a redefinition of life itself. It's a framework that fundamentally challenges our most basic assumptions about reality, doesn't it?
It really does. And the document asserts that humanity is currently in a reconvergence zone, a time where we're poised to pierce veils and recover what was never fully seen. It's fascinating how the UCTE framework tries to bypass the whole debate of whether these concepts were intentionally hidden or simply never coherently realized before now. Instead, it focuses on reconstructing what works, regardless. The stated aim is to weave both worlds now, building true coherence technology while restoring the deep ontological infrastructure it depends on. It implies that understanding these principles is less about proving some historical conspiracy, perhaps, and more about forging ahead with a new framework for reality, one that leverages this deeper understanding of coherence.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? If matter is merely a recursive event, a persistent pattern of energy and fields can be sculpted with coherence memory to create self-healing materials or even responsive environments. What does that imply about our own perception of permanence? Or even the potential for a more direct reprogramming of our environment, maybe even with consciousness itself. This deep dive has presented a framework that truly redefines our potential relationship with the universe, moving beyond static objects to dynamic, responsive fields. What might a world actually look like if our homes, our tools, were not inert lumps of matter, but living field systems, responding to our intentions, our emotional states, shifting structure around our very being? That was a provocative thought to ponder, isn't it?